To think you know medieval prisons, dark cells, iron chains, and rats gnawing in the dark? Well, buckle up, because the truth is far more horrifying. And if you don't subscribe right now, you'll miss the kind of forbidden history they never wanted you to hear. These weren't just places of confinement, they were arenas of sexual domination. A world where rape was routine, humiliation was ritual, and torture devices were designed to mutilate the most intimate parts of the human body. A place where women were treated as property, priests turned confession into abuse, and executions began with acts too degrading to describe. You're about to discover the most terrifying sexual practices in medieval prisons, the horrors history tried to bury. 1. Picture this. The dungeon scene. Picture this. You descend into a medieval dungeon, and with each step, the world you know disappears. The air grows damp, heavy, unbreathable. The stench strikes first, a choking mix of rot, human waste, dried blood, and moldy straw. The torches flicker weakly, their glow more shadow than light, illuminating chains that hang from the ceiling like iron fangs, waiting to bite. The prisoners, slumped against the walls, look less like people and more like hollowed corpses. Their skin is stretched thin over bones, scarred by whips, swollen with infection where iron shackles bite into raw flesh. Rats move freely, bold and unafraid, chewing on sores or gnawing at scraps of decayed bread dropped by indifferent guards. Some captives cough in the darkness, voices hoarse, eyes wide in terror. Others remain utterly silent, souls already broken, bodies alive only by force of breath. But the dungeon is not just a place to hold criminals. It is a stage. And on this stage, every prisoner is stripped not only of freedom, but of humanity. The guards do not simply enforce order, they perform cruelty. Their boots echo in deliberate rhythm, their laughter punctuates every scream. For them, this place is not punishment, it is entertainment. Here, sex is not private nor sacred, it is a weapon. Acts of violence double as rituals of domination. Every degradation is an unspoken law, every humiliation a form of order. The dungeon thrives on turning people into playthings, transforming the body into both canvas and script. And if chains and hunger weaken the flesh, it is humiliation that erases the soul. 2. Rape as control. In medieval prisons, rape was not a shameful secret. It was the architecture of control. From the moment a prisoner entered the cell, their fate was sealed. Stripped of clothing, chained in darkness, they quickly learned that their bodies no longer belonged to them. New arrivals were often initiated by force. A prisoner, weak from days of travel, would be shoved to the ground, his cries drowned out by laughter. Guards or stronger inmates pinned him down, and the assault began. The silence from others was not indifference, it was survival. Every scream became part of the ritual, reinforcing the lesson. Resistance is useless. Your body is ours. For guards, this was more effective than whips. A flogging hurt the skin. Rape shattered the spirit. A broken prisoner was easier to control, less likely to rebel, and more likely to obey. For fellow inmates, rape was currency. The strong claimed the weak as wives, mocking them with femininity, forcing them into endless servitude, sexual, domestic, even social. The victim lost more than dignity. They lost identity. In the twisted hierarchy of the dungeon, masculinity was measured not in strength alone, but in domination. To penetrate was to rule. To be penetrated was to be erased. A man once violated was no longer considered a man, but an object, a servant, a joke. The echo of chains at night was often joined by another sound, the muffled cries of prisoners, broken over and over again. And while the world outside spoke of justice, the reality inside was far darker. Control not through law, but through the most intimate and violent weapon imaginable. 3. Forced sodomy as punishment. The greatest irony was this: the very act the Church thundered against as the gravest sin was weaponized as punishment. Sodomy was condemned in sermons, punishable by mutilation, exile, or death. But in the dungeon, it was inflicted as a tool of terror. Men accused of sodomy often found themselves subjected to it in the cells. Guards, under the guise of justice, stripped and violated them. Fellow inmates were encouraged to participate, turning the accusation into a ritual of degradation. The victim was left bleeding, humiliated, and broken. But the nightmare did not end there. When the prisoner was dragged to trial, their scars, bruises, and injuries became the evidence of guilt. Consent did not matter. To medieval law, the act itself was proof. A man who had been raped was no longer seen as a victim, but as a sinner, guilty of the very crime inflicted upon him. Some prisons even staged these acts publicly, forcing prisoners to endure rape before the eyes of others. The laughter of guards mingled with the screams of the assaulted. For them, the ritual was entertainment and condemnation all at once. The cruelty was absolute. The dungeon blurred the line between sin and punishment. The very act considered damnable became both the torture and the judgment. For the prisoner, there was no way out. They were guilty from the moment they entered, guilty when they screamed in pain, guilty even in death. 4. Public humiliation and exposure. The medieval world was obsessed with spectacle. Pain behind closed doors was useful, but pain in front of a crowd was power, and humiliation became one of the most effective tools for ensuring obedience. Prisoners accused of sexual sins were dragged from their cells, stripped of clothes, and paraded naked before others. Men were forced to wear oversized wooden phalluses strapped to their waists, mocked as sinners too obsessed with lust. Women were tied upright, their bodies exposed, while guards invited inmates to grope or jeer. What should have been punishment became a carnival of degradation. Inside the dungeon, humiliation was a daily ritual. A man accused of adultery might be forced to crawl across the filthy floor on hands and knees, whipped while others spat on him. A woman accused of prostitution might be tied spread eagle, her cries drowned out by the laughter of her captors. These acts stripped away dignity more thoroughly than any whip. For the authorities, humiliation worked better than pain. Bruises healed, but shame lingered forever. Survivors carried the weight of public ridicule into the world outside. Their reputations were destroyed, their families disowned them. Society saw not prisoners, but living examples of disgrace. In this way, humiliation extended beyond the dungeon walls. It lived in memory, in whispers, in the eyes of neighbors. It was punishment without end. 5. Sexual torture devices. The dungeon was not just a prison. It was a laboratory of cruelty, and nowhere was this clearer than in the devices created to torment the body's most intimate parts. The most infamous was the pear of anguish, a spiked iron device inserted into the anus, vagina, or mouth. With every twist, the metal petals expanded, tearing flesh from the inside out. Victims screamed until their throats bled, their agony echoing through the prison corridors. The device was not designed to kill. It was designed to humiliate, to leave survivors broken in both body and spirit. There were other horrors. Genital clamps crushed men's organs until they swelled grotesquely or burst. Red-hot irons were pressed against flesh until skin blistered and peeled. Iron cages were strapped around male genitals, forcing them to swell black with trapped blood. For women, spiked chastity belts turned even the act of sitting into a punishment. These devices were not used in secret. Torture was performed as theater. Victims were strapped down while others watched. Their screams were sermons. Their mutilation was proof that the law was not just about justice, it was about domination. The cruelty lay in its precision. Death was too easy. These devices left prisoners alive, scarred reminders of authorities' reach. Their bodies became monuments to suffering, carrying the memory of the dungeon long after the iron was removed. 6. Women in prison. For women, medieval prisons were not cells of waiting. They were slaughterhouses of dignity. From the moment a woman entered, her fate was sealed. Guards saw her as property, a prize to be used at will. Female prisoners were raped routinely. Those who resisted were starved, beaten, or tied until they broke. Prostitutes were especially vulnerable. Locked inside, they became commodities, sold to guards or wealthy visitors, their bodies used until they collapsed. Pregnancy was common. Many babies died within days of birth. Those who lived were sold, their mothers left in chains, robbed of both child and hope. Women accused of witchcraft faced unique horrors. Stripped, searched, and violated under the guise of holy investigation, their bodies became evidence. Every mole, every scar was declared the devil's mark. Rape became ritualized interrogation, and pain became proof of guilt. For women, the dungeon was more than confinement. It was annihilation. Their bodies were turned into tools for domination, their screams dismissed as the background noise of justice. Death was not their greatest fear. Survival was. 7. Clerical exploitation. The greatest betrayal came not from guards, but from men of God. Many medieval prisons were overseen by the church. Priests and monks who preached purity and chastity often turned prisoners into victims of their hidden desires. Young boys were particularly vulnerable. Summoned to confession, they were forced into silence by acts disguised as penance. Women were told that submission was part of repentance, that refusing the advances of a priest meant harsher punishment or accusations of witchcraft. The hypocrisy was staggering. Publicly, the church condemned sodomy, fornication, and lust as mortal sins. Privately, its representatives inflicted them on the powerless. Victims had no voice. Who would believe the word of a criminal against a man of God? The abuse was buried in silence. Chronicles praised the church's moral authority, while the cries of prisoners echoed only inside stone walls. The dungeon became not only a place of physical torture, but of spiritual betrayal, where the very hands meant to guide the soul instead mutilated it in secret. 8. Execution by sexual humiliation. Execution in the medieval world was never just about death. It was theater, designed to terrify. And for prisoners accused of sexual crimes, the spectacle began long before the blade or the pyre. An adulterer might be flogged naked through the streets, jeered by crowds until the rope tightened around his neck. A prostitute could be raped by guards on the eve of her execution, her humiliation complete before flames consumed her body. Accused sodomites were degraded in prison, their final hours spent in torment before being tied to a stake. These weren't acts of random cruelty. They were deliberate. The goal was not simply to kill, but to erase humanity. By the time death came, the victim had already been stripped of dignity, reduced to a spectacle of shame. The crowd did not come just to see justice. They came to see degradation, and for the authorities that memory, burned into the eyes of onlookers, was the true punishment. 9. Legacy of horror. What happened in medieval prisons was not accidental, it was systemic. Sexual violence, humiliation, and torture weren't side effects. They were the foundation of punishment. Survivors rarely spoke. Those who did were ignored. Many left prison alive but hollow, their spirits shattered, their dignity destroyed. Society branded them guilty forever. Even if they were victims, the stain of shame never washed away. History, too, turned away. Chronicles recorded the flames of execution, but not the nights of degradation before. Church records condemned sins, but omitted the sins inflicted in the name of order. The silence was deliberate. It protected authority, while burying the voices of the broken. And so the truth survived only in whispers, in scattered accounts, in the scars carried by the forgotten. The dungeon's legacy was not justice, it was annihilation. 10. The darkest truth. The medieval prison was never about justice. It was about breaking people so completely that they ceased to exist as human beings. These dungeons weren't cages. They were factories of humiliation, designed to strip flesh, faith, and soul all at once. Picture this. A man, starved and filthy, chained to the wall. He no longer fears the rope waiting in the town square, because what is happening inside these walls is far worse. Every night, he waits for boots to echo down the corridor, for the moment the guards will come not to question, not to beat, but to take his body again. His cries no longer rise above the stones. They have been absorbed into the dungeon, part of its identity. In another corner, a woman accused of witchcraft lies broken. She has been violated so often under holy investigation that she no longer prays. Her body is no longer her own. It is evidence, battlefield, sermon. The pyre outside does not terrify her. What terrifies her is another night surviving here. This was the darkest truth. Medieval prisons turned sex into a weapon sharper than any blade. Humiliation was law. Degradation was ritual. The body, male or female, was the battlefield where power proved itself. Death was not the true execution. The true execution happened long before, in the endless nights where dignity, identity, and hope were destroyed piece by piece. And that is the truth they buried, because what happened in medieval prisons was not just punishment of the body, but annihilation of the soul. And if you think this was terrifying, wait until you hear the next secret history tried to erase. Subscribe now, because the darkest truths are always the ones they never wanted you to know.